Welcome to Assumptions. This is the podcast where two friends, one an atheist, that's me, Kyle, and one a Christian, that's Daniel over there, sit down and discuss each other's worldviews. This week we are continuing our series of interviews that we did for this season 2 on our road to having our wrap-up episode here in a couple of months. Daniel, who are we talking to this week?
Kyle, up until now, we've been interviewing guests that either one of us knows or is familiar with, but this time we got to interview a mutual friend.
That's right.
Yeah, and I mean, Lish is one of those friends in my life that has influenced me deeply, and I say that because when have worked, we met her through work, and when I would work with her and I would have lunches to kind of discuss ideas, I always came away filled up more than I gave away. I always came away excited about new ideas and new possibilities and feeling very deeply encouraged, but at the same time challenged. Anytime I have a conversation with her, I feel that way. I've referenced a couple times on the show Alan Jacobs' book, How to Think, and he has a line in there about how the community that we need in our lives are not necessarily like-minded, but like-hearted. And that's how I feel about Lish. We disagree on a lot of things, but I feel like we agree on more things than we disagree. And she's one of those friends where I might not see her that often, but when I do, I know that I'm going to have a long conversation and feel very stimulated and encouraged and somehow expanded in my world. So that's my
Yeah, I'm not going to be as thoughtful or, I don't know, eloquent as what you just were, but I have always enjoyed the fact of how thoughtful she is and how she, like you said, kind of gives back a lot to the conversation. She's never a passive participant in what we're talking about.
That's right.
She always is asking questions or pushing back a little bit or trying to understand our position even clearer than it was before. And so for that, it's great because it actually reaffirms my point of view a lot of times because it's almost like, well, why do you think that? It's like, okay, I have to think of why is it that I think that way?
I don't know if I told you this before, Kyle, but kind of my goal in life is what gives me the most satisfaction is the combination of creating but also collaborating and then ultimately communicating. And I realized that after having a conversation with Lish, and I realized how much joy I got out of the collaborating piece. So Lish is formative in my life for that way. But yeah, Lish Veldhuijzen, she is originally from Australia. I still hear from the accent, but we're a big fan of her. We're recording this before hearing what she has to say. So I'm really curious where this conversation is going to go.
So she could be a big zero.
That's right. We'll find out. Lish, there's this book that I read recently, and it has a bit of a misleading title. It's called How to Think, but it's really about how to dialogue with people you don't agree with.
Right.
And it's written by Alan Jacobs, and he's this intellectual whose books I always appreciate. They're just very thought-provoking. But he had this section, and it applied to assumptions in the podcast that Kyle and I are doing, but he had this section where he talks about the community that he gathers around himself, and how he tries to bring in people that he doesn't necessarily agree with, but that he is on the same page in terms of what they value. And the phrase that he used that I looked up last night in describing you to Annie was, he says, I don't want to surround myself by people that are like-minded so much as like-hearted. And that's what I think of with you, in the sense that I don't agree with you on a lot of things, and yet I feel like what we do agree with, or what we do find it changes, expands our world, is very similar. And I always come away from conversations with you encouraged and rejuvenated somehow. So
I agree with that.
I'm glad to have you.
I agree with that wholeheartedly.
Okay, enough for the nice stuff. Now for the hard-hitting questions.
That's right. Boom.
Oh, truth. Okay, I'm a little nervous. Okay, but go ahead.
That's okay. We're nervous too. It's fine.
Yeah.
It's been a nerve-wracking podcast season to record. We should go back to storytelling. It's way easier.
Yeah, way easier. How about this? This is, I think, kind of a harder question to start with, but I think it'll put the conversation on the right track. Lish, how would you define your worldview?
Define my worldview? I would define it as dependent on my emotion at that time.
That's a good way to put it.
When I'm feeling good and I'm open to receiving, then you know what? I have a very relaxed worldview that everything is just as it should be, and that I have this big amount of faith and trust. Two different versions of words for me, and that things are going to be okay. But if I was cut off and somebody slipped my tires, or my student loan didn't come through and I didn't have coffee, I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to keep my world small today. So my world's small, and I'm going to be protective of it. So that kind of echoes into how I see the day and interact with the world. That's my worldview.
So it changes. It's
it definitely changes. Yeah. But I would say for the most part, I practice the first. Because that's how I want to show up.
I like how you answer that question, because I was thinking about in the realm of we're a podcast about worldviews, and so Kyle, he's atheist and I'm the Christian, and we kind of unpack these worldviews. But I feel like those labels, they can be helpful and they're worth thinking through, but it's also a very different. What you just described is much more in terms of how you're viewing the world at that moment.
Well, I think it's also more tangible too.
Sure.
I think most people do not go around thinking like, this is my little box of worldview that I live in. It's just like, did this guy just cut me off in traffic? Or do I feel like very thankful for what I have today?
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think for the most part, I don't like labels. But if I was to put it into one word, I would say open. My worldview is open. So I'm open to receiving that experience in the moment.
Did you say, we're talking about sexuality a lot on this podcast. Would you say that your sexuality impacts your identity? And if it does, how does it do that?
I think it's a part of my identity on how I choose to express myself sexually. I think in my early 20s and maybe in my late teens, I definitely thought it was a huge factor of who I was, and went down the roads of discovering that with relationships, with being single. Now I don't have that point of view.
Why did that change, and how?
I don't know, because I think it's fluid. I think sexuality is fluid, and I'm open to experiencing it. I don't know. I think in a way in which my identity to it's too attached. So if I have no attachment to it, then it doesn't belong to anything. I don't have to own it. I think it doesn't need to be owned. It's don't know if this makes sense, but my sexuality is just in and of itself. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think it doesn't necessarily have to define who you are. It is part of you, obviously, but it's not like not everything that you do in a day has to go through that filter necessarily. Like, you don't have to use that. But like, I don't know. That's what I thought. I was like, I'm going to go buy bread, but how does my sexuality dictate how I should buy bread today?
Yeah, exactly. Right? Like, this is a masculine-looking bread, yet I'm identifying with being feminine. Should I go for the smooth loaf versus the masculine-looking loaf? Yeah, no.
Yeah. I'm curious then too. I mean, like dealing with sexuality in your early 20s, and obviously having a few relationships in your life. We've been talking a lot about being single and how we define ourselves without that being another person in our life.
Being comfortable with it.
Being comfortable with
your own identity and with your own yourself, not having to have someone on your arm.
Right. I just want to know like how you at your stage of your life view that. Like, are you comfortable being looked at as Lish as a single person, or do you want or do you require there to be that other person in your life to draw meaning from?
This is I guess this is a very timely question. I haven't had this period in my adult life where I have had many months by myself. I've gravitated towards being in relationship with somebody or people, and so I'm actually coming up with my own definition as we speak, and how I feel about that. I know where I'd like to be and how I'd like to for that to evolve, so I can only speak towards that. But right now, I think maybe even before I was married, I had a hard time being single, because I just love relationships. I love getting to know me through other people in that intimate way. I have a lot of friends, and so I don't need to have necessarily more friends. I wanted to explore that relationship side of me. And so I think I was scared maybe to be single.
So, how has that changed? Like, how is that something that you've, as you, at this stage in your life, like it's something that's new to you? How have you found a way to process that? How have you worked through that, or are you working through that?
Yeah, I am working through that. I'm in a relationship now, and this relationship's like no other relationship I've had before. And it's got this sense of I don't own you and you don't own me, and we're allowing each other to show up just as we are. There's definitely love, care, and tenderness there, definitely support. But the sense of getting to know where we are individually in our lives is just as important. And I feel like at any time, because we don't have that attachment to this expectation of what this relationship should look like, that attachment's freeing. And some days I feel single in that relationship, and that's not necessarily a reaction to it. It's just a sense of feeling single. But I know this particular relationship, she's going to go traveling for a while, and I don't know for how long for. But I know that when we're not physically together, that this time apart, or maybe time apart forever, is good time for me to process my past relationships. But also it's what my heart's calling for. It's asking me to find a way to, and my soul, to really just discover a relationship with myself. And maybe that's the piece that I was missing in my 20s, was knowing what relationship with myself was like. Because I always thought that I had to be in a relationship, but I negated the idea of actually having a relationship with self.
Yeah.
I'm curious then on how you, what role you place on friendship then in your life. Obviously, you have yourself, you have your like romantic partners, but how do you look at friendship in your life? Are they important, and how important are they?
My friends are just as important as my family members, and my family members are like my rocks and my pillars in life. So friendships are very important, and I also know that that people change, so I don't have any expectations on them. So friendships come and go, and friendships they also build and get stronger. But I think that in order for me to have the best friendships, or the most healthiest, or the ones that I want, I have to be in a place where I can give and not always just take. So I would say my friendships, I think, are just as important as my relationship to myself is.
When you talk about the idea of losing friends, and I think that's one of the things, I have this clear memory of being probably 19, 20, so like just shortly into adulthood.
So like what, last year? What are you talking about?
Guys, I'm 25, it's okay. Actually, I had someone who, we Skyped with an online friend of mine who I've never met in person, and they kind of had the same reaction, like, oh, wait, you're so young. Like, I was like, oh, gosh, guys, okay. I thought it was just my in-person friends that think I'm too young. Apparently, I act that way online, too. But I remember having this realization that the really deep friendships that mattered the most to me in high school weren't necessarily permanent. Like, I was losing them. And it was just this reality of, oh, these things change, that I just remember crying that night over that. And it's funny because most of those friendships, one or two of them I've lost, but one or two of them came back in recent years and are now part of my life again. But just that, I feel like that sense of when friendships leave, it can be a very hard thing. And have you had that happen to yourself, Lish? And how do you process that?
No, Daniel. I don't think I have had friendships leaving. Not yet.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, there is. I forget who said it. Something I was listening to, reading something like that. But they said that there are sometimes people do view friendships only as a short-term basis. And it's hard because maybe one or two in my life, but I would say pretty much any of the friends that, like deep friends, like good friends that I've made, have stuck with me for my entire life.
Yeah.
So there's very, very, like maybe one I could count that I had like in elementary school that I no longer like have anything to do with. But,
yeah. What about when relationships end? Like, are relationships based on a friendship for you, Lish, or are they different?
That's a heart hitting question, Daniel.
You don't have to answer it if you don't want to.
because I fall in love with the people and
Yeah.
as who they are, and of course if we're not working out or something expires in that connection for us to live together or have a romantic relationship, I really want them in my life. Like
Yeah.
I respected them enough and loved them enough to share my time with them.
Yeah.
And even though it's not maybe working out, I still want them in my life, and I do want friendships. And that hasn't always happened for me. So maybe I renege on my answer and say, well, maybe my lovers, if they were friends, they've left, and that's been heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But I know that's not always easy for everybody to be friends with their exes.
Right.
If I could have my world, though, it would be that, I would still have them because I fall in love with amazing people. Of course I want them in my life.
I hear that seagull in the background, and that just brings me back to the
This is
coast.
Victoria.
So you may be 4 kilometers from the ocean, but there are still seagulls. That's right. What do you look for our friendships? I mean, we've been talking about this, Kyle and I, in the sense that I've always looked for relationships to begin from friendships, because for me, you know the person so much better. You're not necessarily blinded by how cute they are or how powerful their personality is. You know them for who they are. How are you able to distinguish between friends and what is that? Is it based on friendship relationships for you, or is there something else?
I would agree. I definitely want my lovers to be friends first, but there's always that sense of chemistry.
Yeah.
That lingers in the air. It's going to go from something platonic to something romantic, and that's undeniable on both parties. And I think if that friendship is deep enough and that love and care for each other is deep enough, in addition to the chemistry, then it will do what it's going to do naturally, and I won't force it. But because of that chemistry, later on, if we decide not to be together, sometimes that causes the friendship not to be there initially after the breakup.
Totally. Would you look for relationships outside of a friendship, though, or do they have to start in a friendship?
Repeat that question. I'm not sure if I understand.
Do you look for relationships? I mean, we were talking just earlier about Tinder and relationships that are solely based on looks to begin with, and then personality. Is it the other way around for you? Like, you want that friendship first before a spark is created?
I tried those online apps and Tinder, and they're fun as long as I say it's not going to have any depth for me. But that's me going down a certain track, mine, and that satisfies that point of view, then I could do that for a time being. But constitutionally, that's not who I am as a person. So no, I want to develop a friendship first, and that's, I guess, maybe in my 30s where I'd like to say that's what I'm maturing into, is that idea of, taking things slow, getting to know people first.
I'm going to ask the hard-hitting question here. This is something that Daniel and I have had probably the most disagreement on any episode that we've recorded.
There's some agreement too.
There's some agreement too, I suppose. But what is your opinion? What is sex for?
The purpose of sex.
What is the purpose of sex?
Yeah.
I don't think there's one answer. So if you're looking for one answer, I can't give you that. I think it's a combination of self-expression. I think it's getting in touch with vitality. The majority of us have come from sex. Like, we're born from that. That's our vitality in life. So I think sex is to reach that vitality within yourself and also with the person you're experiencing sex with. I think sex is to heal. I think sex is to celebrate. I think sex can be to rejoice in life. It's also just to connect, and I don't think it's a bad thing if sometimes we use sex to have intimacy, and it could be a wrong thing. I think it's just another expression, and I don't say that lightly. I don't say just go have sex with anyone. I think know why you're having sex, have sex with intention, but that's your personal intention, and I don't think there's a right or wrong intention behind that. But I do believe having sex with intention will heighten the experience.
I'm just going to say that I was right.
But it's interesting because you're describing, I mean, I feel like we haven't talked about this yet, Lish, and because I don't know if we even need to, in the sense that as a Christian, I believe that sex, there's a limitation placed around who should have sex with each other.
Okay.
But that said, that list of describing, that you just described, of what the actual act of sex can do for someone, and the joy that's found in it, and the very act of being human that's in it, I feel like I actually agree with a lot of that, and I feel like that kind of language that you described isn't used enough even by Christians within, say, a marriage, right? Like I believe that sex is for a marriage, and is a sign of a marriage, and it's a way to connect people on a much deeper level than merely physical. But what you described, all those things, I feel like that's there's a way of almost enjoying and rejoicing in the goodness of sex that I think a lot of Christians actually leave behind or are scared to admit. And I actually found, I was imagining that list in the confines of, at the point where, let's say, I do get married and I am able to enjoy that in what I think is the right place for it. That is how part of these, or some of what you described there, is some of what I feel like sex should be. As this expression of joy and of God's goodness, even.
So I have a question for you, Daniel. Why, in your mind, do you think that language is not used a lot in what you just expressed to your community?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'd love to find out more why that is the case. I think part of it comes from an inability to properly enjoy God's gifts. Like I feel like we split the soul from the body way too much, and we limit. So we use language to describe the spiritual aspect of humans, which I believe exists, and then we don't connect that to the physical aspects of humans, which as a Christian I believe God made both and made them together for a reason. And also I just think and there's this sense of fear in that sin, doing things that doesn't please God can so easily happen in the body, but then there's this fear rather than saying, no, we're redeemed. God made us, we're redeemed. There are things we have to be careful about and be aware of, but that doesn't mean we can't enjoy God's goodness. And I think that also applies to other areas of church culture. So, I mean, alcohol, for example, or enjoying good food, or enjoying art, or enjoying the outdoors. Those are all things that Christians have a hard time doing in that culture because our theology doesn't connect with how we live our life. We don't believe that these are good gifts given by God.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And that's just... And I also think that it applies then to my view of eternity. I don't think eternity is this angels with harps on clouds. I think it's God reunites heaven and earth, and so there will be a place where we can enjoy the goodness of God's creation. I'm reading this book right now called The Supper of the Lamb. I'll link to it in the show notes, but it's by a Episcopalian or Anglican priest, and he is a hobby chef. And so he has this beautiful book where he's describing the joys of cooking and the joys of things like an onion. He has 3 pages where he describes an onion being chopped and just enjoying all these the textures and the miracle of the water and then the dryness on the outside and his enjoys dumplings. And he just connects these two together.
I know, I was just saying I'm very turned on by food.
By food. But there is a connection to that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hello, yes, this is Kyle breaking into our conversation once again. As always, Assumptions is brought to you by the Alberta Podcast Network, powered by ATB. If you haven't gone to the Alberta Podcast Network's website, there are so many great shows to listen to. Shows like Repodcasting, Bollywood is for Lovers, Best Wrestling, Pop Cycle, and one that I want to highlight this week, Blue in the Face. Chris Ursaki focuses on art, culture, music, and food in Alberta that is having an impact locally, nationally, and internationally. Check out all of the great shows by going to albertapodcastnetwork.com. Secondly, we are helped by ATB. And this week, I want to talk about the branch for arts and culture. You know, working in the arts means income can be as varied as a time signature or a brushstroke. And the ATB branch for arts and culture was built for artists so you can do your banking in a way that works for you and meeting other industry professionals. That's right. This is also a networking and career development hub. There happens to be one in Edmonton and also one in Calgary. Plus, they also serve as performance venues. So it's like the whole package deal. Creative and banking working together. It's why ATB will always be more than a bank. Thanks everyone for listening. Next episode, again, we will continue on with our interviews. We have a few more of these left, and they're all really good conversations. So I can't wait for you to kind of experience all of those over the next few weeks. But for now, let's get back to our conversation with Lish. Lish, I'm going kind of up on a different tangent here right now.
Of course you would.
What
Tangent caught.
Yeah, exactly. Where do you find your deepest joy in life nowadays?
I have so much of it. I think in the mystery of life and staying open to that. For so long, I've had expectations and this understanding that I could, have a goal and achieve it. I had this creative power, this creative energy, but I was so fixated on the how, and so many things just didn't turn out. And there's that saying, what is that saying? Tell God your plans and just watch him laugh. And I felt like he's laughed at me, or he or she or whoever, for many years now. And I think I'm just getting the joke. And I think I'm enjoying just seeing my life right now, because I had a plan and it didn't work out. I'm just watching back and receiving and watching things unfold the way I didn't think they were going to, and just kind of being amused by that, but also staying curious and applying that to so many things, that theory to my school, to my health, to my finances, to my relationships, to my self-meditation. And that joy of not knowing is so freeing. And I've done my most growth in that. And I'm in a place now to not rush things. And so that peace that comes with it is, complementing to that joy.
It's encouraging to hear that, just as a friend, knowing that you're in that place. And it's funny, though, because the conversation Kyle and I just recorded was about dating and about expectations on dating, and how I feel like it's a problem for both Kyle and I, because we have long-term expectations for relationships and how they'll turn out. But at the same time, in my relationship right now that I'm enjoying, there's a certain sense of trust that comes with it, and a certain sense of I of course would like to have things all figured out down the road in terms of how this will turn out, but I can't. I don't know that, but I can trust the God that that has proved himself to be trustworthy, and because of that, because I'm trusting him, and my girlfriend is trusting him as well, we're able to enjoy it together, and we're able to have that trust together and just enjoy this stage in our relationship. And it's funny because Kyle was talking about the frustrations of not having that, I think a little bit, and the element of control. So I'm curious then, I have that sense of trust and I have that sense of confidence because I believe that I can trust God and that he is in control, and I know his character. But I guess, how do you get that sense of trust and that sense of joy that comes out of that trust of letting go? Where is that anchored in?
Somebody very, very dear in my life taught me the beauty of surrender. And I fought surrender for so long, thinking I was even doing a version of surrender. And I think for me in my life experience, like, life just keeps throwing things at you until you learn the lesson. And I had to yield. And so for me, my only choice was to trust. And like I said before, it's different than faith. Trust was, as I'm exploring trust and understanding trust now, trust, I think it just comes naturally once you believe. I don't know what it is that I necessarily believe in, but this feeling that the universe has got my back and that there is no wrong decision and that it all comes out in the wash, classic Alan Watts quote, and that anything could have been anything, that really I don't have to know everything and that it is going to work out and that there isn't any right or wrong answer, and that really essentially there couldn't be any mistakes in that regard. And because I have that mantra, it strengthens this thing that I have that I find joy in, and that trust in the mystery of it. Was it Eckhart Tolle that says, our job is not to figure out the how, is just to know the what. So we just have to figure out, what we want, and then the rest will come to us. And I'm practicing that. And in that practice, because it is repetitious, I do have to show up every day and do that. I'm finding strength in that. And life demonstrates to me that it works. So that's just my personal experience.
So you're trusting life rather than, regardless of how it turns out, rather than a purpose behind life? Or a guide behind life? Okay. You're trusting the energy of life itself, no matter if it works out well, however that standard is, or if it doesn't work out well, you're still okay with it.
Daniel, I think it's always going to work out well. I do believe in that energy you put out there, like I said before, with intention. I just don't have to figure out how it works out.
I feel like she just outquoted us. She dropped a bunch of more quotes in one interview than we've had up until now.
I'm trying to figure out what I want to call this episode because of all the quotes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's all right. That's great.
It's great.
I guess I'm curious then, with what you've already stated, where do you consider home, or how do you define home?
Up until my summer semester, I thought it was home is where the heart is, or my family, some cliched Pinterest type of quotes.
I was going to say, that just brought the quote like quality down a little bit, quoting Hallmark there. I was impressed, but I wasn't anymore.
Well, my professor, a dear man at the school, Peter Conway, an Englishman, now in Canada, teaching, inspiring many people here, he answered my question to him, what was, how do you find home, or now that you're in Canada, what's your sense of home? And he just said, you know what, I feel at home in the universe. That's where my home is where I am. And I feel at home in the universe, so it doesn't really matter. And I've just been mulling over that for probably the past 4 months, maybe even 6 months. A sense of home is where I am and how I interact with the universe. And I know that's kind of a big thing out there. I don't know if that's necessarily a language either one of you use daily, but that's a word that I use quite often. The universe is bigger than this world, and it's energy and it's thought and it's past and it's present. And I feel at home because I feel comfortable. And the more I feel comfortable with who I am and my choices and how I show up, then it doesn't matter if it's a physical place or a relationship I'm in, or a job that I'm at, or, a moment on the beach, or anything like that, because it's where I am. So I think, to answer your question, it's how I feel about my existence in space and time.
Is that different from home then? Or sorry, is that different from community? Because community is something we are going to be talking about on this podcast season episode. Where do you find your community takes place? Do you feel you're part of a community?
I have a great tribe at the school that I'm going at. Yeah, and so that's a community.
Yeah. Does that change as you change then?
Say that last bit again. Sorry.
Does that change as you change? Like is there a constant community in your life, or does it change as you move or take on new jobs or enter new social environments, or is there a constant throughout your life?
I understand your question. I don't have a constant community other than my family, and I think my friends from high school and that friendship that we'll always have, and I wouldn't even say that was a community. So this is probably the first time I've considered this question, so I apologize if I'm going to just...
That's okay.
These are virgin thoughts. No, I think my community does change because I change and my interests change. And physically where I'm at, it changes. So how I show up in that community is similar to my sense of home. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. But I'm thinking back to what you said earlier about family and friends being almost similar in your case. Like you said, your friends are as important to you as your family. And I think that'll come up later on once we have this conversation, Kyle. But in terms of, is your family simply, I guess, because you talked about how important your family is to you earlier. Do you want a family of your own at some point?
I knew that question was coming. So I've gone off and on, and I think depending on who I was with and my age and my understanding of who I was, I've been off thinking, well, how can it work? How?
Yeah.
But recently, I've just decided that to hear myself, to listen to my true desire. And yeah, you're right. I have mentioned many times that family is important to me. And yeah, I do. I really do want a family. And I know it will happen. And I saw a photo of one of my professors with his youngest child and his wife, and they were up at Banfield. And he introduced us to his family via photo in class for the first time. And I said, hey, I'd like that. I'd like that for myself. I'd like a family where I can grow from and teach my lessons with and build a legacy and a community.
Right.
Does that have to be
biological?
Say that again?
Does that have to be biological, that kind of family in your life?
Oh, good question. I want to be pregnant. Does that answer?
Sure.
I would like the experience of being pregnant.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I read this book about an immaculate conception once. Maybe that's an option.
I heard it's fake news.
I keep being like the Debbie Downer here of questions, but I think what you just said there is so eloquent. By the way, I love Banfield. It's a great place.
Yeah,
to go.
my cousin actually works out there at the research lab.
But I'm wondering.
He kayaks to work.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if even with all of this like joy and with this community and with the partner and stuff that you are living with now, do you ever suffer from loneliness, and how do you deal with it?
Yeah, I think loneliness is a scary thing, and I think at times in my life I have feared and dodged the feelings of loneliness. And I've watched quite a few beautiful mentors in my life experience loneliness, but also watched how they navigate that, and I would say in the summer, maybe just before the summer started, I experienced a wicked amount of loneliness I had never felt before in my life. Depressive loneliness, and it wasn't easy, and I don't know if you could say that I've dealt with it or I've just experienced it and lived with it. I'm not sure. I personally haven't taken too much time to reflect upon it, and in some ways maybe that's why I'm looking forward to this next stage coming up shortly, where I'm having a relationship with myself. So maybe I can dive deeper into being comfortable with loneliness, and maybe even seeing the duality of it. Maybe it doesn't have to be a depressive thing or an abandonment thing, or maybe even something to do with my identity, which I think we've all experienced those elements of. I don't know, maybe if I was to dive into loneliness deeper, I would find maybe it brings up issues that the young girl inside of me hasn't dealt with. And I don't know, I'm in a way ready to work with that when it comes up again. And I think if you'd asked me that question 10 years ago, or maybe even 3 years ago, I would have, probably not have wanted to be excited to jump into that. But I'm learning now that in this, in these moments where they do feel awkward and sticky and yucky, that's a good thing. You got to go down those roads and explore it. Just stay curious with it.
Yeah, I don't think loneliness is a good thing. I can think back to, as a Christian, the Genesis account of the creation of man, and God says it's not good for man to be alone. So there's something about the deep feelings of loneliness of that isn't good, and yet they can exist. Any kind of pain, I think, can exist for a reason, and it can drive us to something deeper, or at least force us to reckon with something that we might have pushed away if we hadn't had that time of loneliness. But I don't think loneliness itself is a good thing. I think we're made for others, and we're made for community.
Yeah, I think definitely, like, as a sole person, you have to be comfortable and understand yourself on a deep level. But we are a sociable species. Even me being like this huge introvert, I still, as we've been discussing, want friendships. I want loving relationships. I need family. I need that community aspect around myself. But loneliness is a terrible feeling. I've been there quite a few times. So
And how have you dealt with it, Kyle?
Well, the first few years, really badly, to be perfectly frank. I was a pretty bad, depressive, almost suicidal person for quite a few many years, and I think that therapeutically, by talking about it more, like I'm feeling this way, and if I tell friends or well, in one case, a therapist, I think. By you sharing it with other people, you lessen the power it has over you.
It's funny, eh?
In many ways.
The problem with not having other people has to be shared with other people.
Yeah, isn't it weird?
Yeah.
So I didn't deal with it well at first, and I think now it's just a matter of when I know that that's the feeling that's coming up inside of me. That's time to reach out to someone. That's usually how I deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, I've dealt with it a lot too, and I think sometimes it's a warning sign of saying something's not right in your life. But I also feel I remember one point I was house sitting for a while, and I was just at a dark place in my life. This was about a year ago. And then I was house sitting by myself, and really was wrestling with depression and loneliness. Part of it was due to work and just where I was at. Part of it was just that phase of life. And my uncle came back, and my aunt was still out on the New Zealand doing an orienteering trip, and so my uncle and I had bachelored it up for a while, and I just realized how much more I enjoyed that, having him there in my life. But I also think that the time of loneliness is a we don't like asking the tough questions. We don't like seeking where our identity is and having that broken. But when times of loneliness or any kind of depression forces us to examine that, it can be a good thing. For me, it was a real chance to cling to Christ, to cling to the one. I look at Christianity and Jesus on the cross when he was dying cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Utterly alone at that moment. So I feel like loneliness is a part of my salvation that Christ went through, the ultimate loneliness, so that I could be closer to him. And that's not always going to be easy. It's not always going to be as trite as it might sound, but that gives me a certain hope. and I also think that as a Christian, this idea of being in community for all eternity, the new heaven and the new earth, being a place where there is community and there is no sea that separates people. There's poetic language that's used to describe that. I think there's something about that sense of finally together and finally inseparable as a community that's really beautiful.
How does that point of view impact your human experience, though, in the present moment when you're dealing with loneliness, though?
I think it gives it perspective in the sense of going, others have dealt with this. Like even my God has dealt with this in terms of him in Christ. Like he knows what this is like, and it also just says that this world is broken. Like this loneliness isn't right. It's not good for man to be alone, and yet I have to deal with it. It's part of this world, but it gives me hope because it goes, okay, this is not forever. That there is going to be a unifying. It provokes that longing. I think longing is a really good human emotion to have for something beyond yourself, something better. And it's good to have moments where you're reminded of that longing and reminded of that brokenness, to kind of wake you up a little bit. Yeah, but it's not something I look for forever. Yeah. Well, and the other thing too, I think, is having these kind of deep friendships. And part of what I really appreciate about you, Lish, is that you're someone that I can do a Skype interview with or have wine on the beach in Victoria after not seeing you for 6 months, and having that sense of connection and having that sense of even as someone who has different beliefs or different views on things, I'm still able to find that sense of unity and that sense of belonging in other people that I feel with you when I have these conversations. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you too.
And thanks for being on this
that's
interview.
great.
Yeah,
There's
we really enjoyed it.
I really enjoyed this.
Yeah.
This was great.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks guys for having me on. I appreciate that.
Perfect.
Yeah. Stay in touch.
Yeah, stay in touch. And Kyle, if
Yes.
you do have loneliness, reach out to me.
I will. Thank you for saying that.
You too, Daniel. All right.
I wish you luck in your class today.
Yeah.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Appreciate that. Okay, gentlemen. Talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye, Lish.
Much love.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, you too.
Assumptions is produced by Kyle Marshall and Daniel Melville Jones. This episode was edited by Kyle Marshall. Our thumbnail was created by the always great Chris Taniguchi. Most of the music in this episode is from the band The Parson Redheads. You can check out their music anywhere digital music is available. If you want a full rundown of the articles and media that we referenced, check out the show notes that Daniel puts together each and every week. They're always a superb document that he puts together. Thanks for listening to The Credits. We'll be back again in a couple of weeks.